She is a relative to many and is constantly relearning language, seed keeping, food systems, and rebuilding relationships with human and non-human relatives. Marisa holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in American Studies from the University of Iowa and a certificate in American Indian Native Studies and a minor in African American World Studies. She earned her master's in tribal administration and governance from the University of Minnesota, Duluth. Marisa is the president CEO of the Minnesota Indian Women's Resource Center in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Prior to accepting this appointment, she served as the director of Native Student Services at the University of South Dakota. Marisa has also served her people as the chief of tribal operations for the Omaha tribe. Marisa has worked in higher education for over 15 years and is dedicated to Indigenous models of governance, education, food systems, ceremonies, and sovereignty. She studies and teaches knowledge rooted in matriarchy and advocates for dismantling systems of oppression that impact our Native communities, including resource extraction and personal violence. Marisa has 4 children: Lauren Mihube, 27, Brianna Misabe, 21, Darius Mase Patanga, 20, and Nia Miakonda, 16. She lives with her youngest daughter, 4 little relatives they care for, her partner Samuel Grant Lamute, and their red healer, Mikai. Please welcome Miss Marisa Miakonda Cummings.
Thank you, Diane. You did a great job on the pronunciations in Omaha, so good work. Well, first, I would just like to say thank you for inviting me to participate in this discussion today and to view this film from a little bit of a different lens. So thank you for that. And just to, usually we introduce ourselves too, so I'm a little, it's a little different. So, but that pretty much said everything. So my life has brought me to Minneapolis right now, and today the court hearings have started for Mr. Chauvin and the George Floyd trials. So everything's kind of starting up today, and so that's what's on my mind, because in watching this film, it brought back that the 3rd precinct in Minneapolis was why AIM was started in Minneapolis. The 3rd precinct was showing extreme force and violence to our relatives that were relocated to the Minneapolis area. And because of that, the resistance that was formed is actually in the neighborhood where I work. It's now called a cultural corridor, but there's about, I believe, 18 Native American nonprofits that are in this neighborhood where the Minnesota Indian Women's Resource Center is. And so it's really an urban res. You know, there's a lot of people here. So I was thinking about that as we were watching the film and watching this intergenerational movement, these grassroots movements that the women often lead and are centered around. And so that was just where my brain went right now. So I wanted to share that with all of you. But I'd like to begin by opening it up to any questions, thoughts, maybe light bulbs that went off while this was being shown, that anyone would like to share. And I want you to share throughout this discussion as well. I prefer dialogue to me kind of talking at you about the film. So I think we all learn more from each other than we do by listening to somebody just talk to you. So if anyone has anything they would like to share, please put your hand up. If you know how to do the hand, if you go down to reactions in the bottom right corner, it's a little smiley face with a plus. You can click on that and share a hand. And so if you raise your hand, I'll call on you. And you can also, if you don't feel like saying it out loud, you can put it in the chat and we will we'll definitely address those thoughts or questions. So does anyone have anything that they would like to start off with in terms of the conversation? Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit and I'll let you all think, because if you're like me, it takes time to process everything that you just saw, right? Um, so in the beginning, when they talk about the survival school beginning, there was actually a similar school right here in Minneapolis called the Red Schoolhouse. And when we think about these spaces that were created to teach Native children about who they are, what are people's thoughts about that in comparison to, say, either modern day state school systems or even boarding school systems? And that reclaim, like basically a reclamation of traditional ways of being is what I call it. But it can look different depending on what cultural group you're from. So, did that stick out to anyone, or were there any thoughts or any light bulb moments that went off when that was discussed?
Well, first of all, I would just say that it is ridiculous that one would have to reclaim who they are as a population. But unfortunately, as we see, that's how it's been. But my question is, what on earth can we do to stop some of this crazy? It's unlawful, it's unwillful. Uh, I mean, is there anything that you have in mind that we could do to put an end to it? I mean, it's kind of like if I break the law and I get a speeding ticket, I have to go pay for that. So why is it that the federal government is not held accountable for not just a decade, but century plus old violations? I don't have any feeling one way or the other. I'm just being funny there. I feel very passionate about these issues. So I hope it came across correctly.
Thank you for sharing, Cynthia. So, yeah, it's taking it all the way back to the doctrine of discovery. So, if anyone is not familiar with those doctrines that are a series of papal bulls, there's 15th century papal bulls that essentially said that um, those voyagers that were going out around the world laying claim to land, that they had the lawful seizure of land by those who were not Christian peoples. It also made it lawful to kill or enslave those who would not convert to Christianity. And so essentially legalizing colonization, and that transferred to our own Supreme Court through the Marshall Trilogy. And then as recently, I want to say is in the 90s or even 2000s with a court case with the Oneida Nation. So it's actually still used that natives have the right of occupancy to land, but not the right of ownership. So, and that's really taken a lot of different turns and how it looks, and that's probably a whole class in itself. But something to look into is just read up about the doctrine of discovery and what it is and what it means and how it's used as a weapon against our people. So you'll see they talked about going to the United Nations. That is what the doctrine that they were using as a foundation for the discriminatory and genocidal practices of the United States government. And then I believe there's also some folks that are still um, going to Italy and to the Vatican to ask that the Pope denounce that doctrine. And, but like I said, it's already been written into United States Supreme Court law. So there's a lot going on there. But yeah, what can you do? So there's multiple things that are going on here. If we want to promote Native children in the school system to receive a Native education, for those of you in Nebraska, I believe that you can't have separate schools, right? I'm trying to remember the word that they're called. It starts with a C. But that would be something that may be beneficial to Native children, right? I know that culture is part of our school in the Omaha reservation, but the kids only get about 15 minutes a day. And so they're being indoctrinated into, a European education, but they aren't receiving the education and language and our traditional ways of life as much as they should. And part of that is also, people would say, well, they should learn it at home. Well, you saw what happened with the boarding schools, right? The boarding schools created a disconnect from parent to child. And we call that like a continuation of learning. And so that knowledge was not transmitted from one generation to the next because it was broken in the boarding school system. And many of us carry those stories in our families, kind of like a lot of violence. It's not talked about much. And a lot of us had to actually learn this going into, university settings to be able to have the words to articulate what happened in our families. And the violence that boarding schools really had on our families and on the health and wellness of our families. And so what I really loved, though, about the film is they're talking about how to mend that, right? We're talking about survival. We're talking about the continuation of culture, our ways of being, reclaiming ceremony. So all of those things don't happen overnight. It took hundreds of years to disconnect them from us. And it will take some time to recreate those systems in our lives and our daily lives too. It's not like I talk about weekend warriors, like you can't be a weekend Indian, right? You're either Indian or you're not. It's all day, every day, it doesn't come in and out. So I thought that was really powerful. One of the most important things I thought about the survival school, and the same as the Red Schoolhouse, is the discussion about treaty education, because, this is not taught in state government schools, right? We don't learn about Native American history. We learn about maybe a little tiny piece of something, but we don't really learn about treaties and what is a treaty, how does it work, and how did it work with the original people of this land. And so I really appreciated that they were teaching specifically the Fort Laramie Treaty, because that was applicable to that group of Lakota people. But these treaties also were how we use them in our fight for justice, right? And we're fighting with these treaties in the courts of the conqueror. So the U.S. Supreme Court and other courts were actually built against us, right? Their whole purpose is to create a judicial system that minimizes our own systems of governance, which include judicial systems, right? What is a crime? What is not a crime? How is that crime dealt with in our traditional communities? We had ways of doing that. And many of that was founded in our clan system for Omaha people. I can't speak to any other group. Just like she said in the film, I can only speak on behalf of myself and my family, right? I don't have the rights to speak on behalf of anyone else. And so, and our families had ways of dealing with things. And you heard that in the film as well. Grandma, the oldest sister, has a role. Our grandmothers have roles, and you sit at grandma's table and she is the one who decides what the family is going to do and how the family is going to do it. And, but then the males in the family will be the voice to the public. So there's a way that in our community that's often done. So that the treaty education to me played directly into the discussion on the river. And in Omaha, we call her Nishude. For those of you in Omaha, you're bordering with her too. And she's a living spirit, right? And she contains water spirits. She's very central to everything that we are as a people. And the Pick Sloan damming project that they talked about with Cheyenne River, they talked about how the dams were put up. Where we were at, the river was actually physically moved. And when that happened, we lost sacred sites where my grandmother remembered, because my grandmother remembered, the river before it was moved. And she talked about the caves where the grandmothers would go pray, where full moon ceremonies were done. And those sites no longer existed once it was moved. So not only was fertile farmland and the women's family farm plots flooded, they talked about the wild onions, the raspberries, all of those foods that we foraged and lived off of that were staple to our food systems. and our culture, because we're seasonal, seasonal people. But they also flooded our women's farming plots. So what that meant is it was a way to disconnect our culture from our women being farmers to a patriarchal way of thinking, and trying to encourage our men to be farmers, which our men never really took to, even to this day. They never really took to a Western or European farming method. Most of the land on our reservation is lent out to white farmers who then farm the land. So, and I believe that's rooted in historically the documents I was able to collect from that being a women's centered around women. Women carry life. We carry, children in water. We birth women or birth children, women birth children into this world through water. And it's basically transitioning from the star world to the physical realm. That's very powerful, very beautiful work. Women work around food systems. We're the ones who carried the seeds, planted, we worked with the crops. And if you think of the Missouri River flooding and then going down, well, yeah, you have crazy fertile farmland, and that was actually documented as well, how the best farmland in what's now known as North America was actually on the Missouri River Basin. And that I'm just speaking to all of that to just to amplify the effects that the Pick Sloan damming project had. And so fast forward, Standing Rock, at that time when Standing Rock started, I was the CEO of our tribe, and the current chairman, or the chairman then, Vernon Miller, and I drove up there before Standing Rock was really big. There was no main campment site at that time. It happened the next day. And we went several times throughout the entire occupation, but it was really, for me, eye-opening, because that's what made me start doing the research about Pick Sloan and what that meant, and then how it carried forward all the way to today with treaty right violations, as well as the Missouri River is one of the most polluted rivers. I mean, as you guys get downstream, it's bad in Sioux City, so I can't imagine what it's like downstream. There was a time when you could drink water from the river, and now you can't even think about doing that. And how impactful that is to our communities where we're fishing in those waters, where we're harvesting. We're still to this day do harvest certain food items from near the river, and it's devastating to a community, right? So for me, that was really it connected all of the tribes upriver to us and what we went through, and this common this common goal of standing up for the water and standing up for our women. And it's interconnected. And the women were the root of all movements, but in AIM, you didn't see that. You hear about the men, you don't really hear about the women and the role that they played in the movements. And I thought it was so cool when you hear Madonna say, like at one point she says something about, she says, we had to make sure that we had enough food to feed everybody. We had to make sure the babies had their necessary supplies. Like, that's not things that men think about. Their thought process would be different. And so I found that really empowering, because that's how we think, and that's how we do things in our community. To this day, most community feeds are led by women. And when it comes to babies being born, it's women who are usually around to offer advice and nurture the new mother. So those are definitely traditional roles that I saw that were are female based. And even when they talk about the border town, and they're talking about the man that would harm, violently sexually assault and harm young Native girls, that act of women going and finding him and beating him is a traditional form of punishment. And when we say in our communities, we were never perfect communities pre-contact. We had we had our systems, and we had people that acted out of the way as well. But that was one of the punishments that, if you acted out, if you beat a woman, if you harmed a woman, the women would come after you. And that's what happened in that case. And so I saw that as a reclamation of traditional governance. Um, and, it showed how strong they were. Like, they weren't playing games. Like, you are not going to do this in our community. And it also shows kind of how they had to be, right? They had to be that strong. Well, actually, they didn't have to be. They could have stayed home and not done anything, right? But because the continuation of their people and their culture and their way of life was so important, they felt that they had to stand up and do that. So I felt that that was really powerful. So one thing I wanted to see if anyone had any thoughts about is relocation, right? Relocation happened in the 1950s. It was a federal Indian policy, as many of these are federal Indian policies. And relocation in the 50s was really trying to move Indians out of reservation areas into urban centers where they promised jobs, they promised housing, but essentially put Native people into ghettos, and rarely did they even have jobs waiting for them. But in this process, it put Native people with access to the Brown Berets, the Black Panthers, right? To other community organizations that were having that similar experiences, different but similar. And so I was wondering what anyone's thoughts were about how relocation and the role relocation played in terms of the organizing that happened with the American Indian movement. And did that surprise anyone, or did that stand out? Oops, Cynthia, you're on. Can you put a hand up? Yep, and then we'll unmute you.
Oh, I was going to say it surprised me. I tend to kind of talk along, but I don't want to, hog all the questions here. But I think it's always very important when people can come together and organize. And what was really outstanding is organized with one common cause and seemingly anyway, few differences. So yeah, amazing.
Absolutely. And, being in Minneapolis with the trials that are happening right now, we are seeing that kind of in a modern day form, right? Where we talk about Black liberation and Indigenous sovereignty being interconnected. And that's something that a conversation that's really, really important, because oftentimes we're picked against each other or pitted against each other as communities that are oppressed. And so finding those commonalities and how we can stand up for each other and address these systems that have been put in place since the inception of the country is really, really important. And I could go into a whole history of Black and Indigenous relationships from contact and show how solidarity was something that always happened. And there were actually laws put in place to prevent interaction between people that were brought here and forced into slavery and the original people of the land. So that's always really an interesting, I love to think of how people resist, right? All over the world. Like, I think it's amazing to see how people resisted forms of oppression, no matter where they're from, because that is, those are the people that wanted to continue their way of life. Like, it was their heart, it was everything to them. And I feel that way about our way of life, and have personally had to reclaim a lot of traditional and ceremonial ways, and have also met opposition even from our own people. And so that's something that I don't think was really talked about in the film, but oftentimes our own are, they're not ready. And so for those that push forward these agendas, for the people, oftentimes they're met with resistance from their own communities. And that is the hardest thing. But they didn't really talk about that in the film, but I already know, how it was.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and then they did briefly talk about spirituality and the difference between those that are Christian. They were like, hey, that's cool. You can be Christian. Like, that's cool. Like, but this is the road we're choosing. And we're going to let our children choose. And so instead of indoctrinating them into a Christian upbringing, they're saying, hey, we're going to let you choose. And I think that's at the very core of our traditional spiritual thinking, is that we all have free will, and we all have that free will to choose what way of life that we take moving forward. So I think that was really important to me to hear that. They also talk about going against society and what that felt like for them. And I think that was where she touched on, Madonna Thunder Hawk touched on what that could be like to be a resistor, right? And how difficult that is to be, and she said she doesn't have a lot of feelings because of how she grew up. All she knew was the fight and the struggle. And then you saw this beautiful way that her daughter is that next generation of healing, right? And so her daughter was able to say, no, I want to put this energy into my children. I want to love my children and acknowledge, my mother and her experiences too. But this is the way I'm going to choose. And that was really beautiful to me. And I can't wait to see her daughter and what her daughter's story is, moving forward, and how that generational healing happens. So that was really beautiful to me. I guess this is something to touch base on with the boarding schools is, and I talked about it briefly earlier, but I don't know if we always understand the impact that boarding schools had. Now we have diagnoses such as reactive attachment disorder, right? We have these diagnoses that we have now. But if you can think of being 4 years old and being uprooted from your language, your parents, all that you knew, and being put into a school that was cold, and there wasn't, a mother's arms, there wasn't, a father's arms, and what that does to a child's mind and a child's self-esteem. And I can't just speak to enough how harmful that was for our communities, right? And the fact that people survived that, because many didn't, they would commit suicide or died of other causes. It's amazing that she could not only overcome that, but then also be able to do the work that she did. But she was angry and she acknowledged that. So I didn't know if anyone had any thoughts about that generational experience with the boarding schools or feelings, because I don't want to talk at you guys this whole time. Were there any feelings that, yeah, Teresa? I think you have to put, there you go.
There we go. Okay. You know what? When I moved here from the Cleveland area, and there were a lot of Poncas, Navajos that had been relocated. So it's kind of cool because, I didn't know I grew up around my Oto side, not my Ponca side. But what I was going to say about, okay, so after a divorce, I moved here. I started going to college. And when I was working on my bachelor's, I remember that newspaper article about broken promises, and they interviewed a lot of people that were from around here. And so at the time, right before that, my mom had passed away, and every morning while she was getting ready to make her journey, my aunt had come out. And so I started asking her questions about the boarding school. And she's the first one I ever met that said we were starving. It was okay. We didn't have any clothes to wear. We didn't have any shoes at the time. And she said, she was fine with it. But my mom did tell a few things because they had been in Marty, but my aunt was way younger. So it was harsh, what they, some of the things that she witnessed. And lucky for her, my grandmother had passed away, and my grandfather found out they were in boarding school, and he came up from Oklahoma and got them. And so I have mixed feelings about it because, I have pictures of my mom and my aunt, and their hair is like this freaking short. They didn't have short hair when they were little, and they were just two beautiful girls. And it's heart-wrenching. But I was going to ask a question earlier too.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see any parallels? This is the reason why I wanted you to come and be the discussion leader. Do you see parallels, or can you share parallels that you see between your work and Madonna's work?
Oh, if only I could even parallel myself to LaDonna, right? Or Madonna.
But you do stuff, because after I saw the movie on PBS, I was like, oh, we got to ask Marisa, because I asked Barbara about this film like a year ago, or well, it was before the pandemic, but at that time we couldn't do it, because they already had stuff lined up. So I saw it again and I was like, oh, we gotta ask Marissa. So I'm just excited because
Well,
I
thank you,
kind of watch you
Teresa.
through Facebook, your work and everything, and I'm just impressed by it. It's just, you're a role model to me, and I'm way older than you. So I'm just in admiration of all your work.
Oh, you're so kind, Teresa. Thank you. And I didn't know you were Oto and Panka, so you're a relative. Yeah, your languages we can almost are interchangeable with ours. So, well, thank you. That is so kind that you think of me that way. I um, I just don't know any other way to be. I grew up in Sioux City. I was born in Winnebago at IHS, as many of us were back in those days, and raised in Sioux City, Iowa. My mom is third generation German American settler. My dad's Omaha, and we don't know who his dad. Well, we know who he is, but he was never in my father's life, and so all we knew was our Omaha side and our German side. And that really defined me. My father and I were very, very close. And I was very blessed to have a father who acknowledged the role of women and told me, like, basically raised me. He was a PR man too, just so you guys know. Like, so he basically raised me, like, I'd have to say A-E-I-O-U to enunciate correctly. Because in his world, he thought that if I could break that barrier into the white world, like he was able to do, that I would be able to do work for our people. And in his mind, though, it was like I was going to be a lawyer and go to DC, and that's how, in his mind, that's how I was going to save, the world. But what he did is instilled in me the matriarchy, the role of women. And he would tell me, don't you ever let them tell you that women can't pray. Don't you ever let them tell you that women can't use their voice. Don't you ever let them tell you we didn't have women medicine people. And then after, really finding out about my family through my grandmother and really delving into it, understanding the family I come from and how traditional my family was and what they did to keep those things alive in secret. And even being punished when my great grandmother had our mark of honor, and she would wear a scarf around so no one would see it. And when the BIA agent found out, they refused to give food to the family, and the family was dirt poor, like very, very, very poor. And so they lived off the land, and so not having access to those food systems because of the flood directly impacted my family and their food sources. And so, but they kept our ways alive as long as they could. And knowing their stories, and she went to boarding school in Genoa. My great grandpa went to boarding school at Carlisle, but came home and knew the language, knew the songs. It was really emotional for me to have to go through that whole family tree. And where do I fit into all of that, right? So I have these, European educations, but is it enough? And I'm so thankful that in my journey, my grandmother had end stage COPD. I'm the oldest grandchild. My parents are both gone. And so I moved home and was able to spend that time with my grandmother for years. We were there 8 years. I was able to work in my community and see it firsthand. I was able to be present at doings in my community and really be part of who we are as Omaha people. And in doing that, it changed my perspective a lot. And it also made me realize what I'm good at, which is I don't know much about guys and how they do things. My partner, like, he does guy stuff. Like, they start the fire, they work with, they do those things. And then women, we work with food, we work with the water, we have our ways of doing things as well. But how is that going to live in our family? How is that going to live in our home? And I'm so thankful I went home, because that's where I met him as well. And we're not related. And that's super, super, super rare. So we were really happy that my grandmother was able to go back and make sure we weren't related. But, from the moment we wake up, you know, when he's having a hard time, I know how to take care of him spiritually. When I'm having a hard time, he knows how to take care of me. We acknowledge that we are descendants of a lot of trauma and that we're trying to heal ourselves and our community day by day. We're not healed. You know, we carry a lot. I carry a lot in my family. My siblings have been removed from my mother. They've gone through ICWA when I was in college. I'm the oldest of 8. And my father left this world because of alcoholism, even though he was never violent. He was what we call a closet drinker, right? And it took him from us because his pain was so much to carry. And so being able to just, our mother was borderline personality disorder. And so just knowing that that was what they were carrying and forgiving them for that has been a part of my process. And then what am I going to do with my kids? Right? Like my kids need to know our language. They need to know, my kids are not enrolled, you know, they're descendants. My kids danced in our arena. The community knows who they are. And that was really important for me because when I re-entered the community, they didn't really know me. They knew my dad, they knew we'd been around, you know, but they didn't know me. And so having my children in our community, knowing people, going to basketball tournaments, like having those interactions with youth their own age was really important to me. And my son now is at UNL. So he's down in the area. And then my youngest daughter, when I became a Daywin, my youngest daughter followed me and I wasn't expecting that. And so she went through her very fast. And we had that on our land in our community when she graduated from it after a year or over a year. But to see our grandmas and aunties and everyone that invite, even little ones were able to witness that. And having my grandma share what it was like when she was a girl or how that used to look and the similarities was profound. And then to have these elders there to witness it along with these little bitty girls that now want to do that someday, right? That's our coming of age ceremony, essentially. So reviving these women's ceremonies are not easy. People are going to talk about you. People are going to have things to say. But you have to do what's right for your family and the ones that are closest to you, right? And then seeing my daughter start tanning a hide. Like we were in Sioux City in our backyard, put up this elk hide, and Sam and Nia just went to town tanning this hide. And that was the first time that Nia ever did that, but she put her hands on that work. And so seeing her, she knows everything I know and more. And it took me 45 years to know what I know. And to see that she's 17 and she knows all that I know and more is profound for me. And not just her, all of my children. She's just my youngest, so she's attached at my hip all the time. But all of my children know protocol, conduct. And that to me means everything. It means more than their degrees. And so, because that means that our way of life is carrying forward. And that's what Madonna was trying to do, right? She wanted the Lakota way of life to be carried forward into the future. And that's what I want for our family and for our Umonhon teachings. I also work a lot with my sister. She has little ones, and her kids mean the world to me. My sister's kids are my kids through our kinship system. And so being able to teach them the language, being able to make their clothes when they dance, make them feel special and to love being Omaha. You know, I wasn't raised to love it. I was raised to hear how we were drunks and Indian women were whores and all those things that they heard, you know, being said around Indian women. I heard that too growing up. You didn't want to look Indian. You wanted to pass. And so, and I was able to do that for a lot of my life, kind of be this culturally ambiguous passing in and out. And now we reclaim our traditional clothes, right? Now, at the first time, I remember going to doing activism work with my traditional clothes on. I was scared but empowered, and then I was like, I'm wearing the clothes my grandmothers wore. That's my armor, you know. They're with me right now. This is my armor, and so. But my grandmother was really scared for me. Because in her mind, like now you made yourself a target, right? Or she would be scared when I traveled up, you know, to Standing Rock because she's like, you know, all these things can happen. And yeah, they can happen, Grandma, but I'll be safe. And so that was always a fear of hers, is how much I traveled and that I would be harmed, which is a legitimate fear. But I can't imagine back in those days when they were traveling around, there was no cell phones. A lot of gas stations wouldn't serve Indians. I witnessed that myself as a young girl in South Dakota. And so I can't imagine how they had to travel in packs back then. You know, you couldn't go alone as an Indian woman. So um, that's, you know, all legitimate. All of those things are what they are. So
Thank you.
yeah,
Somebody else had a question though.
yeah. Let me
I
check
think
the
it's in the
chat quick.
chat. She put it in the chat.
She said, "What's your advice for people nowadays that want to work hard in life?" Oh my gosh. Be true to yourself, right? Like I always thought like there had to be, because I think also the generation my parents were raised in, it was get an education, make money, and everything will be okay. You won't experience racism. You won't experience anything. Everything will be okay if you just go to school, get the education, you'll be respected. That's still kind of true, unfortunately. And, you know, have a nice house, have nice things, and everything will be okay. And the reality is that is not how it works. The reality is that you have to follow your heart. When this position opened up with, I've loved all my jobs. I have to say, I haven't had a job that I didn't love, but each of my jobs were part of my journey to my next job. And so I loved my time at the University of Iowa. I did not want to leave. I worked in the multicultural office. I got to work around amazing young people. They're so freaking amazing. Like I can't even say how inspiring college age students are. Um, and so I think that it's really important to just you know, I went from that position, then I moved home. I worked for a tribal college, then I worked for my tribe, then I worked for the University of South Dakota. And there were challenges in all of that, but also beauty in all of that and what I learned. And then this position opened here, and I wasn't sure it would be a good fit. And the more I looked into it, I'm like, this is everything that I do. It's a perfect fit. But being a CEO is difficult, right? Like the organization, organizational management, like that part is difficult. But being able to train up our staff so that they have the right culturally appropriate services to serve the community is everything. Because if our people who are hurting are given the right services and opportunities, they can heal. And so I see this work that we do as healing work. Even though it looks different, it's still healing work. So I'll say that much. And then someone asked, how is it different for people in the Lakota culture in South Dakota? You know, being from the original people of this land, like we all have these baseline, we call them cultural practices that are common, right? We smudge, we use medicines. We oftentimes people have ceremonies, right? It may look different. They name their babies with traditional names. There's these certain things that are cultural practices that are universal. And then there's specific ways that we do things. So Lakota's Sundance, right? Which may be different than like our Medewan Lodge ceremonies, which is different than Native American church ceremonies. And so there's, you know, we have differences and we have similarities. So the cool thing about us is that we're always looking to make relatives. So I just found out Teresa's Oto and Ponca, so I'm automatically connected to her, right? Poncas and Omahas were once one people, and we split, actually not far from where I am right now. And so when we split, our language is still identical. And then Otos were also with us during that time. And so the relationship with the Otos we had until they were actually removed from us in Nebraska and taken down to what is now known as Oklahoma. And so all of that is how we are as Indian people. So we know Lakotas, I know Dakotas, I know, you know, people from all over Indian country, and we make relationships with each other and support each other in really beautiful ways. And that's something that I think is the most powerful thing that Native women can do, is support one another and uplift the next generation. Show them, because, you know, we have a lot of trauma in our communities, and a lot of people will rip you to shreds. They will look for everything they can. And it's not, I don't even blame them, because it's their trauma speaking, right? They haven't had the opportunity to heal yet. But if we can, those of us that are on that healing journey can support one another and carry and lift this next generation up and model that positive, behavior, that is some powerful stuff, because we're teaching them, just like Madonna and the work she did, right? Taught this next generation how to do things. That's also what we can do. So that's really important for me. Any other thoughts?
I just want to say thank you. It was awesome. And I can watch that
Thank
movie
you.
over and over again. It just makes you feel so much pride. And then seeing all those little Indian power buttons. I used to have one when I was in the 7th grade on my fringy purse that my mom got me in Tijuana. Because I grew up in San Diego. So I'm totally urbaned out. Yeah. My parents met in the Navy. My mom was in the Navy. My dad.
Very common. We had one of my uncles was sent to San Diego.
Oh, who was it?
I'm Richard Parker is his name. He still
Oh,
lives there.
I don't think I've ever met him, but I know
Yeah.
I know who he is.
He
But I
dances.
grew up around Wilbur Solomon's kids.
Okay.
So I know they live in Utah now, or not Utah. I just know Ignacio. I think that's Colorado. His
Yeah.
wife was Ute. Yeah. So yeah, I've had Omaha connection forever.
Yeah, we're everywhere. A little bitty tribe, but we're everywhere, right? So yeah, I'm just really thankful that you showed this movie and we were able to have this discussion. If anyone has any questions later on, you can email me. My email is mcummings, so MCUMMINGS @miwrc.org. Please feel free, if you're like me, it takes time to process. So if there's anything that you would like help processing, reach out to me. And other than that, just keep doing that amazing work down in our people's homelands in Omaha. So thank you all. All right. See you all. Take care.
Right. So thank you very much for, my gosh, the documentary is so robust. So many directions you can go. We gave you a monumental task to discuss that in a short period of time. So thank you very much, Marisa. You were a champion in that way. And I love the hand clap that Diane is giving you. And Posey is also. Posey, could you put up the final slides, please? And Sharon. This is just a reminder that there's an online evaluation, mccneb.edu/IIEEVAL. We'd love to have your feedback. We keep that open for a week. If you really want the address and you didn't get it, you can contact B. Velasquez at mccneb.edu. It's likely that you've seen my email on some of our notices. And then the final slide, our next program tomorrow evening in Women's History Month is entitled, "Who Will Save American Democracy? The Role of Women, Young Voters, and People of Color in American Politics." And our speaker is Latasha Brown, who's the co-founder of Black Voters Matter Fund and a fellow at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. So if you want to know what's going on in Georgia, specifically, she was right behind our recent elections in Georgia, but she can speak to voters' issues across the United States. So thank you again, Marisa. Thank you so much to the audience for being attent and sending good questions. And we wish you a very nice evening. And thank you, Posey. And thank you, Diane, for doing the introduction.
My pleasure.
Thank you all.